Now I know this is another Sherman, and we've done a lot of Shermans already, but it is a very special tank. Not only that, it's fairly new to the collection, so it's worth doing anyway. It's an M4A4, what in Britain was known as a Sherman 5. And although we've already done it as the Sherman Firefly, because that's on the same hull, this is the actual original gun tank. It was the type of American tank most widely used by British soldiers towards the end of the war. And that's one of the main reasons for doing it. Otherwise, to look at, it's just another Sherman with the welded hull, the original vertical volute suspension, and the same turret with a 75mm gun. But what really sets this tank apart is the engine. It's one of the reasons why the tank is a good bit longer. It's actually 11 inches longer than any other Sherman, and therefore you've got more space in the suspension. It was done because the engine itself is a lot larger than the engines fitted to the other Shermans. The engine in this case is what's known as the Chrysler A57 multibank. And it actually consists, if you look at it closely, of 5 6-cylinder engines all clustered around a central crankcase. So in other words, you've got 30 cylinders, so there's 30 plugs need changing, all clustered around this central crankcase. When it was first built, it would develop about 450 horsepower actually, which wasn't bad. It wasn't quite up to British standards, but it was quite enough for a tank of this size. Otherwise, it's basically an ordinary Sherman. But the engine is something to note and something to study. Later, they were fitted with collective carburetors near the top, so they're easier to service, and collective water pumps. But the one we've got in the museum, which you'll see in this program, has got the carburetors spread around with each block of each set of 6 cylinders. So you're going to really have to use your eyes to bring them all together, if you like. But it's quite an interesting tank all the same. Petrol, of course. They didn't have diesel in these things. It was a petrol engine. A few of them we issued to the United States Army, but only for training. In American service, it was generally not terribly popular, and they more or less decided not to use it as a fighting tank. So they did the very next best thing, they gave it to the Brits, and in Britain it was adored. Once they sorted out the problem with the engine, trained the mechanics to service it, they found it was reliable, powerful, and apart from having to lift the engine out every time you wanted to change a plug, it was really quite reliable. So that's really the secret of this tank. It was only ever used by British forces, or later we supplied them to the Chinese, who used them as well. But they were used by everybody except the Americans, who wouldn't have anything to do with them. And you can understand why. They had the Ford V8, which was a much better engine. But the tank has been built in this way, and the only reason they did it was because there was such a demand for the Continental radials as aircraft engines at this time that they decided to get everybody to build an engine of their own. And this was done in the case of Chrysler, originally with the M3A4 version of the Lee, which was quite a rarity. They've only built 125 of them. But no sooner had they got production underway with the Lee than the M4 Sherman came along. So they decided to switch over and make a multi-bank version of that. Quite an effective tank later on, but a lot of trouble to begin with. A lot of trouble training engineers and getting a reliable engine to work. But quite effective otherwise. But looked at normally, it's just another Sherman. The only thing I would point out to you are these applique armor panels on the side. They're welded over the places inside the tank where there are vulnerable things like ammunition storage. So they're welded over to make the sort of internal ammunition a bit less vulnerable. And you'll find them here. There aren't any on the turret in this case. Normally you had 2 on the front of the turret on the cheek pieces. They're not on, which suggests that the turret for this tank probably came from somewhere else, but never mind that now. What matters is that they're here on the side of the hull where you need them. And the basic tank is still more or less like any other Sherman, but they did operate very reliably. The other thing they had was a new form of oil gear traverse mechanism. The original Westinghouse was quite good, but it wasn't very accurate. The oil gear was tremendously accurate. It meant you could train the turret on any target quickly and easily, and it would stop where you wanted it to. So it made the gunner's job a lot easier, and they were another characteristic of the Sherman 5, which is this version. It's in the Markins Guards Armoured Division, which used them, of course, quite a lot. And in fact, they were used by other regiments as well in the British Army. So they are quite a popular tank, or they were in their day. And barring the fact you had to lift out the engine, as I say, to do maintenance on it, the rest of it was fairly straightforward. And that's what made this tank such an effective machine. So this is it, the M4A4 with the wider suspension, but it's an ordinary gun tank, not a Firefly, which has got the longer gun anyway, you'd tell it at once. But that's why they did it. This one has the full crew of 5, 3 in the turret and 2 in the hull. The hull machine gun is missing from this vehicle, but that isn't a difficult thing, just slide one in place. And that's how the tank is put together. Okay, now if you enjoyed that bit of film, or any of the bits of film we've made, if you'd subscribe to YouTube, that helps us a great deal, and more so if you'll support Patreon, because that's something that we really can do with. Thanks very much.